Hi, I'm Sophie Peel. I'm a reporter with Willamette Week. Today we are being joined by Dr. Paul Loikith. He's the director of the Climate Science Lab and also an associate professor at Portland State, right? Portland
That's right.
State in the geology department and an expert on extreme weather, which we as Portlanders are finding ourselves amidst right now. So if you could just begin by sort of giving us like the fifth grade explanation of what the heck is going on right now this weekend.
Yeah, so we have a really remarkably unusual weather pattern that's driving this heat. Um, the overall driver is a broad area of high pressure in the atmosphere. So what's happening is warm air from lower latitudes has surged northward over the Pacific Northwest. We refer to that meteorologically as an atmospheric ridge of high pressure. But then other interesting things happen underneath an atmospheric ridge, and they're just happening to a really extreme degree over the Pacific Northwest. So the ridge itself is centered over British Columbia. That's where kind of the center of this area of high pressure and extreme heat in the atmosphere is. But under an atmospheric ridge, other things happen to make the air even hotter. So you already have hot air from a hotter place to our south displaced northward. Air tends to sink under an atmospheric ridge of high pressure, and as air sinks, it compresses and it warms. So that adds extra heat to this overall hot air mass. And then we've had a few almost like a perfect storm, a perfect combination of elements to increase temperatures even further across the Portland area, today across the Seattle area as well, and other parts of the Pacific Northwest. So on top of having this exceptionally hot air mass overhead, we've had a couple of periods where the wind came from the interior. So one thing that does is it prevents any of the cooling effects from the Pacific Ocean from reaching us. But if you look to our east, we have mountains. And so that air has been descending down the slopes of the Cascades towards Portland. And when air sinks, it warms. So we have extra warming from this wind coming off the Cascades. The marine layer of cool air over the Pacific Ocean has been completely suppressed by all this sinking air under this giant high pressure system overhead. And so we don't have the cooling influence of the Pacific Ocean. We have an extremely hot air mass. And then we have local wind patterns that are adding even additional heat on top of that, which are conspiring to make this a truly remarkable and almost unbelievable heat event across the region.
And how much does climate change have to do with this? Like very little or quite a bit?
So it's hard to say in a specific way without further analysis. We know that climate change is making everything is getting warmer. So the background state is warming. Our cooler events are not as cool as they used to be, and our hot events are hotter than they used to be. So at the simplest level, we can say with a lot of confidence that an event like this event would be less likely to be this hot decades ago because we have this added warming. The question of what is the contribution of climate change to the overall magnitude of the event or the occurrence of the event is something that can be answered through some new research techniques. So without doing that additional analysis, it's hard to say with specificity, but we can do just kind of a general, just a really general high level approximation. Summers in Portland are a couple of degrees warmer than they were in the earlier part of the 20th century. So at the very least, you can add that mean warming onto the already extreme heat. So it would likely have been an extremely hot event because of those weather conditions I just described anyway. But with added background warming, the magnitude of the heat is likely to be higher.
So this was basically, I mean, it seems like what you're saying is this was just a really unfortunate and kind of untimely confluence of a bunch of different factors. Like statistically speaking, how unlikely was this to happen? And I mean, does it happen every 50 years, every 100 years, every 1,000, or is just this like completely unheard of?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost diabolical, and it's like the makeup of the system. I mean, if meteorologists sat around and talked about how could we make, just sort of what could we come up with, which would be the most extreme heat event in Portland? These are all the ingredients we would put in, and then we'd probably say, well, what are the chances of all those coming together? So it's extremely unlikely. There have been other really extreme heat events in Portland. Portland is prone to really bad heat waves, and we've seen them in the past, not to this magnitude, at least in the recorded history, which goes back into the 1800s. But in the late 1800s, there's a heat wave across Oregon that was really, really extreme. In 1981, Portland hit 107. Portland's hit 107 a couple times before that as well. There was an event in late July in 1965 that had some similar characteristics to this one, but still didn't reach the magnitude of extreme heat that we've experienced with this particular event. So, oh, actually, I should mention 2009 was another year with really extreme heat, and the most severe aspect of that was to our north. So these do occur. There's not really a regular occurrence, but if you average it out, it's years to decades that we see a really, really bad heat event like this. When you look at the historical record, weather's very variable. And if you have a long enough time record, it's kind of amazing what weather's capable of producing. And so if we went back hundreds of years, maybe we'd see something else that we don't have in the recorded record. So it's hard to say exactly if there is an analog for this in the historical past. But this level of severity, this level of persistence, and all of these ingredients coming together really is, pretty unprecedented in our record of observation over the Pacific Northwest. Although, again, there are other historical extreme events that were pretty remarkable themselves, but this just kind of pushes those aside with the magnitude.
Yeah. Was this predictable? Like, did you know this was going to, even if you knew that it was going to be like 113, it was going to reach that today, like, did you know about all these factors months ago or weeks ago?
So weather forecasts are pretty accurate most of the time, about a week in advance, and there's some skill beyond a week and a half or so. So that's kind of the lead time that we have on a weather event. This is just a discrete weather event in that sense. The weather forecasts for this event have been exceptionally good. In fact, that's one of the most really interesting thing to me as a meteorologist about this. It was not this weekend we just had, but the previous weekend I started being concerned about the likelihood of this event. And I think, like most meteorologists, looking at the forecasts that we get from computer models, seeing temperatures in the 110 to 115 range, it was really hard to believe. It seemed like there must be something must change. The numerical models we're using, that just doesn't seem realistic.
Yeah.
And it turns out that's what happened. And the models that meteorologists use and weather forecasts use captured this with really great skill. And the persistence of that high skill across the week leading up to this was quite good. So in a weather forecasting sense, we had pretty good accurate lead time. Before that, it's forecasting skill for weather events is very difficult to do. So, a month ago, there's really no way to know that something of this magnitude is going to occur at this time.
Yeah. And, in your particular ecosystem of meteorologists and climate change experts, like, is this just blowing people's minds? Like, is this a big thing right now? Or is there dialogue going on between people?
Yeah. I mean, just texting with colleagues constantly. And it's truly amazing. I think we continue to just be amazed when we look at the weather map and we see the numbers, because they're so outside the range of what we've observed before.